There is a quiet kind of power that does not announce itself with noise, nor does it seek validation through reaction. It lives in the stillness between words, in the pause before a response, in the dignity of choosing not to engage when the world insists that you must. In a time where attention is constantly demanded and emotions are easily provoked, the ability to ignore becomes more than a habit. It becomes a statement of strength, a reflection of self-worth, and a deep understanding that not everything deserves your voice, your time, or your spirit. Because when you learn to ignore what does not serve you, you begin to hear something far more important, the voice within you, steady and unwavering, guiding you toward peace, clarity, and a life that is no longer controlled by the noise around you, but defined by the calm within you. Ignoring is not weakness, it is the quiet declaration of self-respect and inner authority. It is the moment a person decides that their peace is not negotiable, that their energy will not be scattered in every direction simply because something or someone demands a reaction. There is a deep wisdom in knowing that not every provocation deserves an answer, not every insult deserves a response, and not every opinion deserves a place in your mind. When you ignore, you are not retreating from life. You are choosing it more carefully, more deliberately, more truthfully. There comes a point in every life when reacting to everything begins to feel heavy, almost like carrying invisible stones in your chest. Each reaction, each argument, each attempt to prove a point adds weight that does not belong to you. Ignoring, in its purest form, is the release of that weight. It is the understanding that your worth is not determined by how quickly you respond, nor by how loudly you defend yourself, but by how firmly you stand in your own truth without needing constant validation from the outside world. When you learn to ignore what disturbs your peace, you begin to notice how much energy was once lost on things that never truly mattered. Words that were meant to provoke lose their sharpness when they are not received. Actions intended to disrupt fall flat when they are not acknowledged. In that silence, something powerful begins to grow within you: clarity. You start to see people and situations for what they are, not for how they try to make you feel. And in that clarity, you regain control over your emotional landscape. Ignoring also teaches patience, a quality that cannot be rushed or forced. It asks you to pause when every instinct tells you to respond immediately. It reminds you that not every battle is worth fighting and not every moment requires your participation. In that pause, you find strength, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that stands firm without wavering. It is a strength rooted in confidence, in self-awareness, and in the quiet certainty that you do not need to prove yourself to those who have already chosen not to understand you. And perhaps most importantly, ignoring protects your spirit. It creates a boundary between who you are and what the world tries to project onto you. It allows you to remain grounded in your values, undisturbed by distractions that pull you away from your purpose. In a world that often equates noise with importance, choosing silence becomes an act of courage. It is a reminder that true power is not always visible, not always heard, but deeply felt in the way you carry yourself when no one is watching, and in the way you respond or choose not to respond when everyone is. Not every voice deserves your energy. Silence is often the strongest boundary you can set. There are voices that arrive not to understand, but to interrupt, not to listen, but to diminish, not to build, but to unsettle the ground you stand on. When you meet such voices, the instinct may be to rise and meet them at their level, to match their intensity with your own, to prove your worth through argument and defense. Yet, there is a deeper wisdom in recognizing that engagement is not always empowerment. Sometimes engagement is surrender, an unintentional giving away of your calm, your focus, and your inner balance. Silence, when chosen consciously, is not empty. It is full of intention. It draws a clear line around your energy, saying without words that what disturbs your peace will not be entertained. In that quiet refusal, you are not avoiding truth. You are protecting it. You are preserving your ability to think clearly, to respond with purpose rather than impulse, to remain anchored in who you are rather than being pulled into who others expect you to become in moments of conflict. This is where silence transforms into a boundary, not visible to the eye, but deeply felt in the way you carry yourself with steadiness and restraint. There is a quiet dignity in not reacting to every disturbance. It reflects a level of maturity that understands the difference between being present and being reactive. Presence allows you to observe without absorbing, to hear without internalizing, to acknowledge without surrendering control. Reaction, on the other hand, often bypasses understanding and leaps directly into emotion. When silence is chosen, it creates space for reflection, and in that space, wisdom has room to rise. You begin to respond not from the urgency of the moment, but from the stability of your principles. Over time, silence reveals its power not only in how it protects you, but in how it reshapes the behavior of those around you. What once required a reaction no longer receives one, and in that absence, certain patterns begin to dissolve. The need to provoke loses its reward. The expectation of attention fades, and what remains is a clearer sense of who respects your boundaries and who was only ever drawn to your responsiveness. In this way, silence becomes a filter, separating what aligns with your peace from what disturbs it. To embrace silence as a boundary is to trust yourself enough to step back when needed, to believe that your silence carries meaning and that your absence from unnecessary conflict is not a loss, but a quiet form of strength. It is in these moments, when you choose not to respond, that you are not withdrawing from life, but stepping more fully into it, with clarity, with intention, and with a sense of control that no external voice can take away. When you stop reacting, you stop feeding the very forces that seek your distraction. There are moments in life that are designed to pull you out of your center, to make you forget your direction, to invite you into conflicts that were never truly yours. These moments often arrive dressed as urgency, as offense, as something that demands an immediate response. Yet, beneath that surface, they often carry a simple intention: to take your attention, to consume your energy, and to shift your focus away from what truly matters to you. Reaction, in many cases, is a kind of surrender. It hands over your inner calm to something external, allowing it to dictate your emotional state. Each time you react without reflection, you are, in a sense, agreeing to engage with something that may not deserve your participation. Over time, this pattern can scatter your thoughts, fragment your energy, and leave you feeling drained without fully understanding why. But when you choose not to react, something subtle yet profound begins to happen. You reclaim that energy. You redirect it back into your own purpose, your own growth, your own sense of direction. There is strength in recognizing that not every stimulus requires a response. Just because something attempts to disturb you does not mean it has the authority to succeed. In that realization, you begin to separate what is real from what is merely noise. Distraction loses its grip when it is not acknowledged. It fades when it is not entertained. And in that fading, you create space. Space to think more clearly, to act more intentionally, and to remain aligned with the life you are consciously building. Choosing not to react also changes the way you experience control. Instead of being pulled along by external triggers, you become anchored in your own awareness. You begin to observe situations rather than being consumed by them. This shift does not make challenges disappear, but it changes your relationship with them. They no longer dictate your mood or your movement. Instead, they pass through your awareness without settling into your identity. And in that passing, they lose the power they once seemed to hold. Over time, this practice strengthens your inner discipline. It trains your mind to pause, to evaluate, to choose, rather than to respond impulsively. That pause, though brief, becomes a powerful space where clarity can emerge. In that space, You are no longer a participant in every disturbance around you, but a steady presence moving with intention. And in that steadiness, you discover that silence is not empty at all. It is full of control, full of awareness, and full of the quiet confidence that comes from no longer giving your energy to what was never meant to define you. Ignoring is the art of choosing peace over provocation and clarity over chaos. It is a deliberate act, not of avoidance, but of discernment. In a world that often rewards reaction and feeds on conflict, the ability to step back and remain untouched by unnecessary disturbance is a rare form of intelligence. It is the understanding that peace is not something that simply happens to you. It is something you actively protect, moment by moment, choice by choice. When provocation arises, it often carries a hidden invitation to abandon your calm, to step into disorder, and to lose sight of your inner direction. Ignoring that invitation is not denial, it is clarity in motion. There are situations that are designed to pull you into confusion, to blur your judgment, to make your emotions louder than your awareness. In those moments, reacting may feel natural, almost automatic, yet reaction without reflection often leads you deeper into the very chaos you are trying to escape. Ignoring, on the other hand, creates distance. That distance is not coldness, it is perspective. From that perspective, you are able to see more than the immediate trigger. You begin to see the pattern behind it, the intention behind it, and the lack of necessity in engaging with it. Choosing peace requires a certain kind of courage. It is easier, in many ways, to respond, to defend, to argue, or to prove a point. Those actions provide immediate release, a sense of temporary satisfaction. But peace asks for something different. It asks for restraint. It asks for trust in yourself, that you do not need to engage with every challenge in order to remain strong. It asks you to believe that your silence carries weight, that your absence from conflict does not diminish you, but rather preserves the stability you have worked to build within yourself. Clarity emerges when chaos is no longer given a place to settle in your mind. Every unnecessary reaction adds noise, and over time, that noise can make it difficult to hear your own thoughts. Ignoring interrupts that cycle. It filters out what is irrelevant and allows what truly matters to stand forward without interference. In that clarity, decisions become easier, emotions become steadier, and your path becomes more visible. You begin to move with intention rather than impulse, guided not by the urgency of external triggers, but by the quiet understanding of your own priorities. In this way, ignoring becomes more than a response. It becomes a practice of choosing what deserves your attention and what does not, a practice of returning to yourself whenever the outside world attempts to pull you away. And with each moment you choose peace over provocation, clarity over chaos, you strengthen your ability to remain grounded, focused, and aligned with a life that is shaped not by reaction, but by conscious and deliberate choice. What you ignore loses power over your emotions, your time, and your direction. Power is not only in action, but also in what you refuse to engage with. Every moment of attention you give is an investment, and like any investment, it shapes the returns you receive in your inner world. When attention is placed on things that drain you, distract you, or distort your sense of self, it slowly begins to pull you away from the life you intend to build. But when you consciously withdraw that attention, what once seemed significant begins to fade, not because it has changed, but because you have chosen not to sustain it. Emotions, when left unguarded, can be easily influenced by external noise. A single comment, a passing remark, or a moment of provocation can ripple through your thoughts and alter your state of mind. Yet, when you learn to ignore what does not align with your values, you create a shield around your emotional world. That shield is not built from resistance, but from awareness. You begin to notice what affects you and what does not, and in that noticing, you gain the ability to decide what is allowed to take root within you. Over time, this practice steadies your emotions, not by suppressing them, but by preventing unnecessary disturbances from taking hold. Time, once spent, cannot be reclaimed. It is one of the most valuable resources you possess, and yet it is often given away without consideration. Every reaction to something insignificant, every argument that leads nowhere, every distraction that pulls you off course, these are moments that quietly consume your time. Ignoring what is unworthy of your attention is, in itself, a way of preserving your time. It is a recognition that your hours and days should be invested in growth, in purpose, and in the things that bring meaning to your life, rather than scattered across situations that offer no real return. Direction becomes clearer when distractions lose their influence. When you are constantly reacting, your path becomes fragmented, interrupted by the need to address every external stimulus. But when you choose to ignore what does not serve you, your focus sharpens. You begin to move with consistency rather than interruption, with intention rather than reaction. Each step forward is less about responding to the world around you and more about aligning with the vision within you. In that alignment, your direction is no longer easily swayed by noise or disruption. In the end, what you ignore no longer holds authority over your inner world. It cannot dictate your emotions. It cannot consume your time without permission, and it cannot divert you from your direction unless you allow it to. Ignoring, then, becomes an act of reclaiming control, not over others, but over yourself, your attention, and the life you are steadily and deliberately choosing to live. Silence can speak louder than words when it reflects confidence rather than fear. There is a distinct difference between a silence that comes from hesitation and a silence that comes from inner certainty. Fearful silence is often heavy, filled with doubt and avoidance, as though one is shrinking from the moment. Confident silence, however, carries a quiet presence that does not need to announce itself. It stands firm without explanation, grounded in the understanding that not every situation requires a verbal response to affirm one's worth or position. When confidence guides your silence, it is no longer about withholding out of uncertainty, but choosing not to engage because engagement is unnecessary. In that choice, silence becomes expressive in its own way. It communicates composure, self-assurance, and a steady awareness of one's own value. You are not silent because you have nothing to say, but because you recognize that your energy is better preserved than spent on what does not contribute to your growth or peace. This kind of silence is not empty, it is intentional, measured, and full of meaning that words could not always improve. There are moments when speaking less reveals more about a person than speaking at length ever could. In conversations filled with tension or attempts to provoke, silence can diffuse what words might intensify. It removes the fuel that conflict often depends on and replaces it with stillness. That stillness creates a pause, and in that pause, clarity has room to settle. Others may expect a reaction, but instead they are met with calm. And in that calm, the dynamic shifts, not through force, but through restraint. Confidence in silence also reflects a deep trust in oneself. It is the assurance that your identity is not fragile, that it does not need constant defense or explanation to remain intact. When you are secure within yourself, you do not feel compelled to answer every challenge or justify every misunderstanding. You allow your presence, your actions, and your consistency to speak over time. In doing so, silence becomes part of your strength rather than a gap in your expression. Over time, this kind of silence shapes how you are perceived and how you perceive yourself. It reinforces the understanding that composure is not the absence of response, but the presence of control. It teaches that true confidence does not rush to fill every moment with words, but knows when to remain still. And in that stillness, silence transforms into a quiet declaration of self-respect, one that does not seek approval, does not fear judgment, and does not need to prove its worth through constant expression. Ignoring teaches discipline, the mastery of responding only to what aligns with your growth. Discipline is not built in grand moments, but in the quiet decisions you make when no one is watching, when the temptation to react is strongest, and when the easier path is to engage without thinking. In those moments, ignoring becomes a practice of restraint, a conscious effort to pause, to observe, and to choose wisely rather than impulsively. It is in this space between stimulus and response that discipline takes root, not as a rigid rule, but as an inner alignment with what truly serves you. To grow is to become selective with your attention. Not every opinion, not every criticism, and not every situation is meant to shape your direction. Some are distractions in disguise, pulling you away from the very path you are trying to strengthen. Discipline allows you to recognize this difference. It gives you the ability to ask without noise or urgency whether engaging in something will add to your growth or subtract from it. If it subtracts, ignoring becomes not avoidance, but a deliberate act of preservation. There is a quiet strength in choosing not to be moved by everything around you. Life will present challenges that test your patience, your emotions, and your focus. Without discipline, each of these challenges can become a turning point that leads you away from your center. But with discipline, you remain anchored. You begin to understand that growth is not always about doing more, but about doing what matters and letting go of what does not. Ignoring what is irrelevant is part of that letting go. It clears the mental and emotional space needed to move forward with clarity and intention. This kind of discipline also reshapes your habits over time. Instead of reacting automatically, you begin to respond thoughtfully. Instead of allowing external triggers to dictate your state, you maintain control over your internal world. Each time you ignore what does not align with your growth, you reinforce a pattern of self-mastery. That pattern, repeated consistently, becomes part of who you are. It reflects in your decisions, in your relationships, and in the way you carry yourself through both challenges and calm moments alike. In this way, ignoring is not passive. It is an active choice that requires awareness, strength, and consistency. It is a discipline that refines your focus, strengthens your character, and keeps you aligned with the direction you have chosen for your life. Over time, it becomes less about resisting distractions and more about naturally gravitating toward what supports your growth, allowing everything else to fall quietly into the background without needing your attention or approval. Not reacting instantly creates space for wisdom, perspective, and emotional balance. In that brief moment of pause, something subtle yet powerful begins to unfold. The urge to respond immediately often comes from emotion, an impulse shaped by pride, hurt, or the desire to be understood at once. But emotion, when unexamined, can narrow your vision. It can make a situation appear more urgent, more personal, or more permanent than it truly is. When you resist that instant reaction, you give yourself the opportunity to step beyond the immediate feeling and see the situation with a clearer, steadier mind. Wisdom rarely speaks in haste. It reveals itself in stillness, in reflection, in the quiet space where thoughts are allowed to settle before they are expressed. In that space, you begin to recognize patterns instead of isolated moments. You see not just what is happening, but why it may be happening. You begin to understand intentions, dynamics, and consequences more deeply. An instant reaction often misses these layers, but a measured response is shaped by them. This is where your awareness expands, not just outward toward others, but inward toward your own tendencies and triggers. Perspective also grows when reaction is delayed. What feels overwhelming in the moment can appear smaller when viewed with distance. Time, even in small amounts, has a way of softening intensity and revealing proportion. By not reacting immediately, you allow the moment to pass through the filter of reason rather than being captured entirely by emotion. In doing so, you are no longer confined to a single viewpoint. You can consider alternatives, weigh outcomes, and choose a response that reflects who you are rather than what you felt in a fleeting instant. Emotional balance is strengthened through this practice as well. Each time you choose not to react impulsively, you train your mind to remain steady under pressure. This steadiness does not mean you stop feeling. It means your feelings no longer control your direction. Over time, your emotional responses become less volatile, more grounded, and more aligned with your values. Situations that once might have unsettled you begin to feel more manageable, not because they have changed, but because your relationship with them has changed. In this way, the pause becomes a source of strength. It is not empty hesitation, but a conscious space where wisdom can form, perspective can widen, and emotional balance can be maintained. Within that space, you are not defined by the first impulse that arises within you, but by the thoughtful response you choose to give, a response shaped by clarity rather than reaction, and guided by a deeper understanding of both yourself and the world around you. In a world that demands constant response, the power to ignore becomes a form of liberation and self-mastery. There is an unspoken pressure in modern life to always be available, always be reachable, always be ready to reply, to explain, to justify, to engage. Messages arrive without pause, opinions circulate endlessly, and attention is constantly pulled in multiple directions. In such an environment, silence can feel unusual, even uncomfortable, as though not responding immediately means losing relevance. Yet true liberation begins when you no longer measure your worth by how quickly you react to the world around you. To ignore, in this sense, is not to disconnect from life, but to reconnect with yourself. It is the conscious decision to step back from the noise and reclaim your attention as something valuable and finite. Every notification, every demand, every interruption does not automatically deserve your energy. When you begin to recognize this, you stop living as a reflex to external signals and start living according to your own priorities. That shift marks the beginning of self-mastery, the ability to govern your responses rather than being governed by them. There is a quiet strength in not being accessible to everything at all times. It allows you to create boundaries that protect your mental space and preserve your focus. Without these boundaries, your attention becomes fragmented, divided among countless inputs that rarely contribute to your deeper goals. But when you choose to ignore what is unnecessary, you gather your energy instead of dispersing it. That gathered energy becomes the foundation for clearer thinking, more intentional action, and a more grounded sense of presence in your daily life. Self-mastery grows in the moments you resist the urge to react immediately. It is strengthened each time you pause, reflect, and decide whether engagement is truly needed. In those moments, you are not withdrawing from responsibility. You are taking responsibility for your inner state. You begin to understand that control is not about controlling everything around you, but about controlling how much of it you allow to enter your mind and influence your emotions. Over time, this practice transforms your experience of the world. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What once demanded immediate attention begins to lose its urgency. You move through life with a steadier pace, guided not by constant reaction, but by deliberate intention. In that steadiness, freedom takes shape, not the kind that removes you from the world, but the kind that allows you to engage with it on your own terms. And in that space, where you are no longer pulled in every direction, the power to ignore becomes not just a skill, but a quiet expression of independence and inner control. True strength lies in restraint, the ability to walk away without proving a point. There is a certain dignity in choosing not to engage in every argument that invites your attention, not because you lack a response, but because you recognize that not every situation deserves your voice. The impulse to prove oneself is deeply human. It is tied to the desire to be seen, to be understood, to be acknowledged. Yet, there are moments when stepping into that impulse only leads you further away from your peace. Restraint in those moments is not silence born of defeat, but silence chosen from clarity. Walking away without proving a point requires a quiet confidence that does not depend on external validation. It is the understanding that your truth does not become stronger by being defended in every space, nor does it become weaker if it is not immediately acknowledged. When you feel the need to prove yourself in every disagreement, you place your inner stability in the hands of others' perceptions. But when you choose restraint, you reclaim that stability. You allow your actions, your consistency, and your character over time to speak on your behalf, rather than attempting to compress your entire worth into a single moment of explanation. There are conversations that are not meant to be won, only endured and released. In such moments, engaging further often adds heat without adding clarity. Restraint allows you to recognize when a discussion has reached its limit, when continuing would no longer bring understanding, but only prolong tension. Walking away at that point is not avoidance, it is discernment. It is the ability to see that preserving your peace holds more value than proving a point that may not be received in the way you intend. This kind of strength also reflects a deeper maturity in emotional awareness. It shows that you are not controlled by the urgency of being right, but guided by the intention to remain centered. When you no longer feel compelled to respond to every challenge, you begin to move differently through the world. Your energy becomes more intentional, your words more measured, and your presence more grounded. You no longer scatter yourself across every disagreement, but instead reserve your voice for moments where it can truly contribute meaningfully. In the end, restraint becomes a quiet form of mastery over the self. It is the ability to pause, to assess, and to choose peace over validation. Walking away without proving a point does not diminish your voice, it refines it. It teaches that not every battle is worth fighting, not every opinion needs correction, and not every moment requires your participation. And in that understanding, strength reveals itself not through the force of reaction, but through the calm certainty of knowing when to remain and when to let go.